You have to start being aware of the negativity that's holding you back and causing anxiety. Once you understand what's happening in your own, you start to realize how much the outside world is affecting yours. That's critical. If you're constantly around negativity, you're never going to get to that emotional place where you can just sit and be quiet because your brain is going to be fried.
Hey everybody, I am here today with Mr. Mike Wood. Mike, what's up, man? Thanks for joining us here on the show.
Not a whole lot. I appreciate you having me.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm really looking forward to this discussion because not only are you super successful in business, having really being the operations whiz that you are, I guess we could say, based off of the work that you've done with the company that you're a part of, but also you really become this person who's an expert in helping people as a result of first helping yourself really change the way that they think, therefore changing their life. So with that being said, what I'm curious about is how did you get to this point? Tell us a little bit about the journey of how you went from where you were to where you are now with really focusing on breaking limiting beliefs, eradicating self-doubt, and ultimately helping people become the best versions of themselves.
Well, Devin, I appreciate you asking me that. I lived with the anxiety and depression at levels that were pretty rough to deal with. I used to be afraid to walk into a gas station because I didn't want to talk to the pump. The lady at the register. One of the coolest things I'd seen was when you get to put your card in at the pump, so you didn't have to talk to anybody. At times, I looked on the outside that I was okay, but I wasn't. I was struggling. I lived with it for a very long time. And I always thought that if I achieved this thing, my life would get better. If I found the right woman, I found her, my best friend, but still I was miserable. I found the right job, made enough money, got to where my wife could stay home. Every next thing I thought was going to make me happy, and it just didn't. I'm 45 years old, achieved everything that I thought would make me happy, and I was just as miserable as I was when I was 21 and, looking at trying to possibly even end this thing, just completely miserable. And I told my boss at the time that I was going to quiet my mind by any means necessary, and I meant it. I don't think he quite understood what I was saying there, but yeah, 3 years later, I wasn't the same person, and it's all about turning the focus inward and getting into the quiet, getting used to being comfortable in the quiet, and everything changes.
So what caused that for you? What caused you to get to the point where externally you had everything, it sounds like, but then, internally, it sounds like there was a lot going on there. So what was the cause of that for you in your life at that point?
So the root cause, honestly, is a bunch of core beliefs that I was living by that just were written by, a 12-year-old kid, a 1-year-old kid, a 5-year-old kid. They were all core beliefs. That one told me I was stupid. Another one told me, I should be afraid to fight because if I lost, I would look like I wasn't a man. My dad left when I was 2 years old, and I didn't get to really meet him until I was 12 years old. And looking up to him and admiring him, I kind of listened to a drunken story that he told about fighting one day, and it left me with a core belief that, man, gave me hell for the next 12, 10, 15 years. And I was an athlete that wasn't afraid to put my head in the middle of into a skirmish on the field or on a basketball court. But if somebody even talked about a fight, I just completely panicked. And for a lot of years, that led to a lot of anxiety just around what it meant to be a man. And then, anxiety surrounding not being able to read till I was 25 years old. So a combination of those two things just left me in a constant state of anxiety. And, I realized that I could have eliminated all of those in 2 1-hour sessions. Well, the first one probably not. Maybe 10 sessions for the first one, and one session for the core belief my dad gave me. But it's just young people trying to figure out life, and the subconscious mind is a pretty amazing thing when you get to understand it. And we're all running off of old programs, and when you learn how the subconscious mind works, it'll change your life.
So, Mike, what was the difference between those two beliefs that made you say, and define what you mean when you say session? Do you mean like therapy, hypnosis? What do you mean? Number one, what do you mean by that? And then also number two, why did you say that one of them could have probably been eliminated with one session versus the other one, which would have been eliminated after 10 sessions? What's the difference there?
Well, the first thing is, a core belief is what I'm talking about. And I actually have rewritten over 200 of my own core beliefs. And somewhere around 125, I created my own. It's a writing exercise, and it's part of my Learn to Love Being You program that I'm trying to share with the world. But some core beliefs are a one-time traumatic experience, or even a happy experience that creates a negative core belief. And then the other one is I couldn't read till I was 25 years old, and I made it through public school. And so in those situations that I was constantly dealing with, where the teacher would call on me to read, or when I was a kindergartner and I couldn't spell my name, so teacher got frustrated with me and wanted me to spell Mike instead of Michael, instead of being patient with me and trying to learn. And I realized at that moment that I couldn't read it at the same level as everybody else could. And so that created an elevated emotional state. And if you can get yourself into an elevated emotional state, your subconscious now is wide open to be programmed. And I got left with that clear intention that I was dumb at that moment. So that created one negative core belief. Well, I had probably 50 negative core beliefs from my childhood. So I would have to go back to each one of those and rewrite those traumatic experiences, because each one of them will create another core belief.
So you also mentioned that one of those beliefs could take 1 hour in one session, the other one could take 10 sessions.
Yeah.
What's the difference there that determines how quickly somebody can eradicate an old belief or an old program and reprogram it with a better belief or thought?
Yeah. So if it's a one-time experience, I think most people have a lot of both. But if it's a one-time experience, say you got in a car wreck and now you're terrified to drive a car anymore. That's a one-time experience. You could go back and reframe that entire experience, and your subconscious mind won't try to protect you from it anymore. But I work with a young girl who literally told me that she felt traumatically, she felt like she was abused physically and mentally every day for 11 years. There's no way you're going to rewrite that with one session, because it happened over and over and over again. And she was constantly reinforced that she was worthless, unlovable, stupid, ugly, all these things. And it takes time to go back and really dive into all of that. But if it's a one-time experience, a one-time thing that created a core belief that you're living by that's causing you pain, it only takes an hour and you could be done with that.
How does somebody go about identifying the limiting beliefs they have?
That's where you got to sit and listen. Learning to listen is a great thing. Just bringing making the unconscious conscious. Whenever you're feeling kind of funky, just sit and listen. And your body will tell you. Your body and your mind will tell you if you could bring yourself into a quiet place. If I try to teach most people just to box breathe through any emotion, and then just try to identify what is going on, and you get yourself in a quiet state of mind, and it's pretty easy to identify.
So why do you think most people don't enter that quiet state of mind? Why don't people take the time to create some space for silence, boredom? Why is that?
Because it's uncomfortable. Subconscious mind is trying to protect you in that space. The subconscious mind don't like it there. The subconscious mind wants you comfortable thinking about something you already know about from the past, or it's trying to push you into the future to protect you from something going on. But the reality is, when we bring our attention into the present moment, It's the only place that peace can actually be found. And the better we get at it, it's like practicing. If I want to run a marathon today, I'm probably not going to make it very far. But if I practice over time, I'm going to build up the stamina to be able to do that. So, being quiet takes time and practice.
So, with that being said, when it comes to the subconscious mind, there's a lot of stuff out there with people talking
Yes.
about what the subconscious mind is, what it isn't, how it works, why it's important. What would you communicate to people? Why even bother learning about the subconscious mind in the first place? Why spend time, if I'm a business owner, learning about the power of my subconscious mind if I could just be spending that time getting more leads or closing more deals? What's the power in that? Why even spend time in that area?
Because it puts you in a program. If you're in a place and you're stuck, it's because you're running 95% of your days on autopilot. You're doing the things that you were programmed to do, and we learn how to drive. It takes us about 6 months to a year to learn how to drive. But after that, we drive to and from work every day, and we don't even think about driving. We do it subconsciously. We do 90% of everything that we do subconsciously. And when you bring the consciousness to the subconscious, now all of a sudden you get to decide what that program is. You are the computer programmer of your supercomputer, and most people don't realize that. So if you're stuck as a business owner and your business isn't moving the right way, it's you. As the business owner, your business is only going to do what you are capable of bringing to the table. You are the leader. I read a book about from Jocko, extreme ownership, and they said there is no bad teams. There's only bad leaders. So as a business owner, if you're going to move forward past that, you have to challenge your programming, because it's you that's holding your business back.
So, how do I identify that? How do I identify the difference between maybe a tactical skill that I can go out and learn and improve upon versus no, it's actually a belief that's holding you back? You already have, because I'm just reflecting on myself as a business owner at certain points. I've had all of the skills, I had success, I proved to myself that I could do it, but subconsciously it was like I didn't want to continue to push past that point because maybe I was scared if I could handle it, or what happens if I bring in a bunch of new clients and they're not happy, or whatever the case
Yeah.
may be. And then that just kept me really small, where it kind of felt safer to stay where I was than
Yep.
to go into that unknown state. So, okay, how do I sit down though when I'm at that crossroads where maybe life isn't really that good? And once again, it might just come down to silence, like you alluded to, but how do I differentiate, especially as a business owner, which a lot of people that are going to be tuning into this are, how do I differentiate between I have a skill issue or a tactic issue, a strategy issue, or it might be actually something in here in my mind that's holding me back?
I'm going to say 99% of the problems of a business owner, it's in here, right? As soon as you remove some of these mental blocks that you're unworthy, Michael Jordan talks about most people weren't afraid to uh, to miss the game-winning shot. They were afraid to make it, right? They were afraid to make it, and that's where it goes back to a core belief. There's four major core beliefs that they all channel down to: unworthy, unlovable, stupid, and ugly, right? And that unworthy one, if you're afraid because you don't feel like you're worthy, there's a program inside of you that says you're not worthy, your subconscious mind is going to create failure. If that makes sense, like if you have a program inside of you that says you're unworthy or you're stupid, it is going to, your subconscious mind is going to create your environment. And if your environment has a program that says you're unworthy, you're not going to succeed at the level that your conscious mind says you're capable of doing. And as soon as you remove those, everything just opens up. The universe starts opening up. All of a sudden you get a new client. All of a sudden you get these new things because the subconscious mind has removed that, and now all of a sudden you are worthy of being able to achieve those things.
So there's somebody listening to this right now and they're like, Mike, this sounds awesome. And maybe they've identified that a limiting belief that they do have. Can you walk us through maybe an exercise or something that we can do when we're writing in our journal? So what are some exercises that we can practically do to be able to get rid of those limiting negative beliefs and begin to replace them with empowering beliefs that would take us to the next level in our lives?
So there's two ways that well, there's a lot of ways. I know, and I'm very skilled with two of them. One of them is just going back to a moment in time and rewriting that core belief. The other one is auto suggestion. It's how you learned how to walk. It's how you learned how to drive a car. So if you do the same thing, repetition over time, you're going to, create a new core belief. The limiting ones, you have to go back and rewrite them. The reason you have to go back and rewrite them is because the subconscious mind has no concept of time, right? So if something happened when you were 5, it's still happening today. The beautiful thing about that is the subconscious mind has no concept of time. So you could use your imagination and go back in time right now to that moment and reframe it with compassion, love, and forgiveness. And forgiveness is a major part of that. But you have to go back to that moment, tell your 5-year-old self that you didn't understand what was going on. You got left feeling unworthy and unlovable, but that's not the reality. You were always worthy. You were always lovable. Reframe it with the forgiveness for whoever made you feel that way. Maybe even have to forgive yourself because you didn't understand how to process that information. And then you release it. And, and I've got a worksheet that can get people through it, but you could do this in your own mind. You could beat it up. The Buddha's been doing this for 2,500 years. It's not a secret. This isn't something that I just cooked up out of the air. There's lots of different variations of this. I do think mine's very simple because it's a writing exercise, and you could do it in an hour and do it by yourself. You don't need a lot of coaching after you've done it a couple times. But that's basically the premise of how you have to get rid of an old negative core belief. Every time we achieve something in life, it builds confidence, and that builds another core belief that says, oh, I'm capable of doing this. I'm worthy at this level. But it's very hard to break down the next barrier when you have those negative core beliefs, because that negative core belief's telling you you're not worthy of it, and it makes that barrier extremely hard. When you do finally knock down that barrier with persistence, hard work, and all that stuff, then you're able to, move forward at a slow pace. But as soon as you remove all this stuff, man, the world just opens up to you and starts speaking to you in ways that's beautiful.
So how was that for you? What did life look like compare before when
Oh
you
man.
didn't compare the before with how life transformed after you, number one, understood all of this
Mm-hmm.
information, but more importantly, applied it?
Man, it changed everything. It changed everything starting at work, and then it transitioned to home life. It transitioned to everything. I spend most of my time at work just mentoring people and just helping them understand, how to keep their emotional intelligence intact. I started teaching, leadership courses and trying to teach some of the tools that relate to the business world. And our company just evolved from that. It kind of took on this different persona that, because you had limiting beliefs and because you would get excited or because you had anxiety, none of that was now blocking people. People knew that they were in a safe place and they were able to kind of navigate it and expand on their own careers. So as the rising tide lifts all boats, and if you've got an employee that is riddled with anxiety, you don't have a very good employee, to be honest. But as soon as they're able to calm themselves, get in a safe environment, you see a genius come out. So now all of a sudden you got employees starting to change. Negative folks, they just leave. They can't even exist in this environment. So from a professional perspective, it just affects everything in a business, right? We got over 350 employees, and it impacts virtually every single one of them because the negativity is such a big thing. If I sit on this call with you right now and I just start saying negative things and whatever, it's going to trigger negative chemicals in you just by being listening to all of it. And so when you're in a work environment that's filled with negativity and toxicity, now everybody's working on cortisol, and you're not working at your optimum potential. As soon as you start shifting those chemicals to oxytocin, everything starts to change. People become more intelligent. Your business starts to thrive because you have a bunch of people that creates a family-like atmosphere, but everybody truly cares about the business. Business becomes more than a LLC. It becomes something much bigger. It becomes almost a living organism that is breathing, and it's vibrating an energy that connects everyone, and it all of a sudden starts to just move, and opportunities start to happen and change, and it's pretty amazing.
Mike, how would you recommend business owners incorporate these types of practices within their business? Like, what is practical, that came out really difficult there. What's the practical application of what we're talking about within a business to help raise the standards, help the culture, and ultimately because ultimately what it's going to do is it's going to help get more out of every single person within the organization, which is going to help the company scale, right? So what does the practical application of that look like within the business?
So it starts with the leader, right? There are no bad teams. There's only bad leaders. So if you can create emotional intelligence as a leader, and you don't pop off, you don't get upset, you don't bring your home life to work, you're able to stay calm and emotionally intelligent, that resonates throughout your company. So to me, that would be the biggest thing, is to stay calm, because when we get into an elevated emotional state, we lose 40 to 60% of our intelligence. Right. And so to keep yourself in a calm state of mind, that would be number one. And then learn to master that book, that I mentioned earlier, Jocko's books on extreme ownership. Take extreme ownership of everything. There is no blame game. When I first started utilizing that book, when you sit down in a meeting and you take ownership of a problem, we flooded a building in our fire division, and I'm not a fire guy. I couldn't hang a sprinkler head if I tried, but we flooded a building, and everybody knows that I'm not a sprinkler man. I sit in a room after flooding a 30-story building, and I'm the boss in there, and I'm trying to come up with a solution. I had to find a way to make that problem 100% my fault when I walked into that room, and I did it with sincerity. I asked the guys, "Hey guys, if this is my fault and I need you guys' help fixing this," and they would say, "That how could this be your fault?" I was like, "No. Who's ever been trained on a sure-off to make sure that this wouldn't have happened?" They all raised their hand. None. Nobody did. I said, "So for years, you guys have all been doing this work, and nobody's had any training on how to shut off a system properly?" No. I said, "Well, that's my fault." So we go, and then the room starts popping off. "No, it ain't your fault, Mike. I could have done this. It ain't your fault. I could have done this." And as it moves around the room, we have 5, 6, 7, 8 action items to improve the company off of a mistake that was a pretty big mistake, but we got better from it. Had I walked in there and started pointing at people and getting mad, everybody would have been on defense mode, and we'd never come up with one solution. But it takes an emotionally intelligent leader to be able to take ownership of it, because most people want to say, "No, it ain't my fault," because they have a physical reaction to that. If you could get rid of that ego and take ownership of a problem, it makes your company better. If there's somebody in the room that doesn't need to be there, make the right decision and get rid of them, but do it calmly and, appropriately, but not when there's a problem. Work yourself through that problem, give them a chance to fix it, and then after you've talked to them, then remove them. But that would be my best piece of advice, just off a short meeting with somebody, is learn to take extreme ownership and just become emotionally intelligent. If you come into the office and you're yelling at folks on a daily basis, you probably need to dial that back down, because if you have to yell at everybody every day, you got the wrong people.
Yeah, and correct me if I'm wrong, Mike. With the company that you're a part of, and have scaled to upwards of, I think you shared with me, like 90, $100 million in annual revenue, somewhere around there. Is that accurate?
Yeah. We in the 13 years since I've been here, we went from $2.5 million a year to about $95 million this year.
I mean, that's not too bad, huh?
No. And in the construction world, most companies go bankrupt with that kind of growth. In the tech world or different things, but we're having to buy excavators and our overhead gets big. And, so it's pretty impressive that we've done what we've done. And a lot of that credit goes to the boss, because he's not riding around in a Maserati. He dumps it all back into the company, which allows us the working capital to be able to keep growing. So, got to get
Now, you, Mike, you specifically, what's your role within that company?
I'm the COO. I'm number two. Right. Jason Jarrett is the owner, and I am number two.
So I think that's really important, because everything you've done is operations, right? And obviously part of operations is getting people to execute on these systems, processes, operations that you set up. So what have you found to be the best practices for, number one, creating systems that people can use to execute on their jobs so that they don't have to come and bother you all day, so that you could focus on your job? What's the key there to creating those systems that allows people the autonomy to do their job without having to come to you to make every decision along the way?
That's a great question, because in order to grow like we have 7 different companies, and each one of them is treated like his own individual company, and we've set up systems to incentivize them to be owners. So we literally have 20 something owners at our company because of the profit share agreements that they have, and the systems that we have. But it's everything has to have a double check in business. All right. If it doesn't matter what it is, everything has to have a double check. And that's the foundation of our company. Is we literally create up a system where there's a double check on 100% of everyone in the building. So the double check, I could sit in my office and stare at my fish and not do anything for 2 days, and then all of a sudden 2 or 3 problems hit me because those double checks, are raised and brought to me. But here again, if I'm excitable and I'm not approachable and people don't want to come and talk to me, well, they're not going to want to bring me problems. So I have to be open as an owner. I have to be accessible. My door has to be open. People can't be scared to knock on my door to talk to me, right? If people are scared, then I'm not going to. Those double checks aren't going to touch me. So it's a big deal to be open and receptive to your people. Otherwise, the double checks just don't work.
When you say double check, what do you mean by that specifically?
So, like we got contracts, right? We're a contractor, and we have to review contracts all day, every day. And it's on the estimator and the project manager to review those contracts, make sure they're proper before we sent them out. When we got started early on, man, we were losing hundreds of thousands of dollars. One year it was over $600,000 just in contract mistakes, right? If the right plan documents aren't in there or whatever, any small mistake could cost you a lot of money. So we set up a checklist that they all have to follow. Well, I also have an admin system, an admin office that double checks what they're doing. And if they don't do their job, that admin that works independently of them lets me know that they're not doing their job. So it's just a double check on everybody,
Yeah, that makes sense. I can see how critically important that is, right? So how do you deal, what's your personal thoughts or frameworks that you apply to when somebody was responsible for something, they didn't do it? How do you hold somebody accountable for that?
You got to have honest conversations with people. They're without getting excited, you got to let them know what's going on. And, depending on the level of the problem, you just have to let them know where you're at and what the expectation is, and how much of that problem you'd be willing to tolerate. And it's just being honest, right? If you could tell, I report to Jason most all the major issues. And if there's an issue, I have to basically let the conversation that I would have with Jason behind closed doors would be something like this. Jason, they screwed this up pretty bad. It's probably going to be about $125,000 hit. They screwed up. It was a mistake. This is the first time they've made that mistake. We're going to work with them. Not a big deal. They've owned it. They've said it. That's a big deal. If you sit down with somebody and you talking to them and they go, man, I couldn't sleep last night. I'm so sick about this. I'm not going to make this mistake again. I am so sorry. Well, that person just took ownership of it. They're probably not going to make that mistake again. But when you got somebody come into your office and they're telling you, oh man, Johnny got into my stuff and he didn't send me the right email and I was pressured to get this out. And, this really wasn't my fault. That's the person that you got to watch out for, because they're not going to get better and they're probably going to make that mistake again. So I would judge each situation based off of how they react, because 90% of the time when somebody takes ownership of it, you're probably not going to have the same problem again.
Yeah. So it sounds like ownership is really one of the foundational things of this entire conversation.
Yeah. Yeah, it really is. But it can't happen with an ego, right? Ego has to leave the building.
What do you mean when you say that?
Most folks that have a big ego, they're not gonna take ownership of it. They're not. That's gonna get in the way.
So on that note, when it comes to ego and accountability and stuff like that, what I'm really curious about is how important is a support system throughout all of this? Because it's really cool to do this on your own and eradicate these limiting beliefs. But I feel like if you don't have a support system in place to be able to reinforce those new beliefs, because if you're hanging out with a bunch of people that just bring you right back to the old ways, it's just going to continue to be more of the same stuff. How important is it to surround yourself with a community or a group of people or a person that supports you throughout that journey? Or maybe it's just something that you recommend people do it in a silo by themselves. I'm not sure. What have you seen to be the best approach to that?
So the first thing that I would say is, I think everybody needs to go through, it sounds corny like I'm trying to sell you, but the best way for me to answer this question is literally the first 3 weeks of my program. Because what it does is, in the first 3 weeks, is I teach people how to bring their attention into the present moment, the only place where peace can be found. And then I teach them how to get separation from their thoughts, because the thoughts that are going on in our head are not ours, right? They're just regurgitated stuff from the past. It's not reality. When you get to the point where you could witness the thoughts instead of engaging with them, now you're sitting in the witness seat. The third week, you start from that witness seat, you start reframing those thoughts and turning them into negative, into positive. And after about a week, your brain will do that on its own. So you can wake up in the morning, you might have a thought, man, I don't want to do this today. Your mind, you could train it within 3 weeks. You could train it to go, you'll still have the thought that I don't want to go to work today, but within a second, your brain will catch it and go, oh, no. Today's going to be a great day. We're going to have a great day. You can't you can't stop the thought from coming, but you can reprogram it and have it think. So that's what I would say that everybody needs to do. Because anybody who's gone through my program and taken it serious, because it's hard work, but you have to take it serious. But if you do, after 3 weeks, everybody goes through the same thing. They have to rearrange their friends, their work life. The negativity that is around them will affect you. And so you have to be careful. And that's, to your point, to your question that you were asking, how do you get yourself in a good place? You have to start being aware of the negativity that's holding you back and causing anxiety and cortisol to run through your body. And then once you understand what's happening in your own, you start to realize how much the outside world is affecting yours. Because that's critical. If you're constantly around negativity, you're never going to get to that emotional place where you can just sit and be quiet, because your brain is going to be fried. And it's, you don't even have control over it. It's the people that are around you are influencing it, and you have no concept of how that's happening.
Okay, so we've been talking a lot about what are the right things to do and how we actually get this done. But what are some of the biggest misconceptions that you see when it comes to false beliefs and how to eliminate them and replace them with more positive, empowering beliefs?
Well, I think the biggest thing is people think they're thoughts are who they are. I was working with a young girl one time, and she's been through it. I don't want to go into her whole story, but she's had about as bad of a childhood as you could possibly have. And I was sitting there listening to her because she has such negative self-talk. She calls herself the most negative things all the time. And I was like, you realize that's not you. And you are the one listening to that. The true self is the one listening to those words. Those are not your thoughts. You don't have to. And it was just such a mind-blowing, for whatever it was that resonated with her. And she was able to just start doing that immediately. What we talked about is reframing those thoughts. And I think that's the biggest part of this is people identify with their thoughts and they think it's reality, and it's just not. That's one of the biggest conceptions. And the other one is that you could go to a therapist and you could go get medicine and you could go get there. When people are just giving you tools to deal with the symptoms, they're not dealing with the problems. And that's one thing. When I went through what I've gone through and I started to learn actionable items on how to fix some of this stuff, and I understood how the mind and subconscious mind actually work, I just wanted to scream it to the rooftops because it's so logical and simple, and everyone can do it. Now, I have come across a few people that have some hormone imbalances, and you're just not going to be able to, control your mind until you get some of the hormones under control. But if that's not the case, virtually everyone can do what I'm talking about. And it's not just like Mike's a genius. This is all stuff that's been out here in front of us for 2,500 years. That's been practiced in Buddhism and a lot of other religions for a very long time. It's just the message has been diluted, and we've not paid attention.
So, Mike, what makes what you do different than going to a therapist?
We go to the root of the problem. We don't just talk about the problem. We don't. If you've been abused as a child by your caregivers, we don't just talk about the abuse. We actually go back and we heal from it. We go back to the source and we reframe it with love, compassion, and forgiveness for your caregivers who abused you, and it frees you from the pain that it caused.
So, Mike, as we wind down the conversation, who do you help? Right? When I say that, I mean, is it just anybody that particularly wants to change how they think, or what is the core outcome that you see most people come to you with when they first come to you and they're like, "Hey, Mike, I really want your help. I want to do X, Y, Z." What's the end result that people are usually looking to achieve as a result of working with you?
They're miserable. Because my program takes an hour a day, a minimum of an hour a day of work, and it's hard work. How many New Year's resolutions do people do and they don't do it, right? That's the same thing. You have to be so tired, sick and tired of being tired for my program to work. Otherwise, you're just not going to do it. So you have to be very serious about just acknowledging that you feel terrible all the time and you're sick of it, and you'll do anything to move forward. I think Jim Rohn said it very, very well a long time ago. He said that if you want to improve your life, whether it's business or anything, spend twice as much time on you as you do your work. And that's what this is. You spend the time on you, and this will give you all the tools you need to take control of your mind and body, and you'll be able to just sit on a chair and be peaceful for no reason, instead of just filled with anxiety all the time, like you got to do something, you got to, and you don't. You could just sit and relax. Peace is found right here in the present moment. You don't have to go anywhere for it.
So, Mike, if there's somebody out there and they're listening to this and they're like, "Man, I really want to, this sounds really great. I want to get to know Mike a little bit more, learn a little bit more about what he does," where's the best place to reach you?
LearnToLoveBeingYou.com. It's the best place to find me. I really would enjoy it if people would reach out to me for the free coaching call and just let's have a conversation, because everybody's going through something similar, but it's different for everyone. So I'd love to be able to walk through it with everybody and kind of put them on the right path.
Mike, it's been a pleasure, man. Thanks for coming on the podcast. Great experience. And you're so right, man. The mind is what controls everything. So thank you for coming on here and allowing us to learn from all of your wisdom of how we can get rid of all of these damn limiting beliefs that are holding us back and step into the next version of ourselves. So thanks for coming on, Mike.
Thank you, Devin. I really appreciated the conversation.